I'm feeling rather lazy this year, so rather than doing the usual thing of figuring out a theme for myself as I look back across the year, I thought I'd outsource that part of the video this year and rely on these dictionaries that basically just give you a word of the year, and maybe we can use that and figure out what's going on. So, these are some of the words of the year from various dictionaries. Brat and demure were both selected by different dictionaries, which I find interesting because these are contradictory, as they both speak to opposite ends of, I guess, a feminine behavior and aesthetics thing. But if we look at our own Western democracies as a whole, it does sort of speak to another word of the year, polarization. And what is polarization if not an aspect of the Enshittification of democracy, which is another word of the year? Now, this word has morphed from being just applicable to online services and platforms, and it's being used for like everything now, which, look, I personally find a bit annoying, but let's just go with this vibe-based approach. I think the reason the word resonates and has now been used for things that have existed for longer than Enshittification has been around, words like shrinkflation, is because it speaks to a sort of inevitability, like there's just this natural decline that we have no control over. So, 2024. I started using Obsidian Notes in 2024 because it just seemed like a good alternative to all the other enshittified apps that were out there. And looking back, there were two things that I wrote in my "This is interesting" column. And on the 3rd of January, the first thing I wrote down is this: egg prices rising in Russia, mostly due to an external factor, aka the war in Ukraine. And like most good media and stories, the beginning is reflected in the end. And here you go, the whole world is grappling with egg stuff. The second thing I put down was this: a devastating plane crash in Japan. And right at the end of the year, we got another devastating plane crash, this time in South Korea, and also another one 10 days previously. Given the Boeing failures and the general cost of living crisis and the fact that these two were the only things I put down as my first attempt at cataloging stuff throughout the year, to me it feels a little bit spooky in how reflective this all is of what happened throughout the year and how it ultimately capped off at the end as well. Now, I don't think I want to start things off with all of the military conflict, so we will get to that later, but the narrative coming into 2024 was that it was a huge year for elections. More than 70 countries and more than half of the world's population was going to have a say about their national leaders and representatives. And even Japan and France decided to join the fun and go early to their elections. Since I primed things with that egg story, it should have been clear, I think, to most that the degradation to cost of living would be a tremendous factor. And indeed, there was, I think, not a single incumbent government that did not see a swing against it in the just 10 major countries that is tracked here. But it does seem to track broadly across the world, except perhaps in El Salvador. But since that goes against the narrative I want to craft, it's getting ignored. Bam! Early on in the year, we got a surprisingly substantial loss of seats from the BJP in India. And of course, only in retrospective analysis did we see this point come into effect in the United States election, despite all of the economic indicators pointing to a pretty good recovery. But maybe that is the rub, where these economic numbers just don't reflect the lived experience of the majority of people like they used to. To drill down a little bit on America specifically, I very much do get the sense that there's this anti-establishment vibe and a lack of enthusiasm from the Democratic base. And this is in large part due to the enshittification of the Democratic Party. They stick to their older and often very old and cognitively declining leaders, and they paid the price for it. Not to say the Republicans are much better, but nothing ever seems to stick to those guys, so we're gonna ignore them. Now, those two were the biggest elections, India and America. First being due to sheer population, and the other as, the world hegemon, whatever. But in general, as we got through 2024 and had a squiz at democracies going about their business, it was not good viewing. As stated, France went early because of turmoil within their parliament, and the left parties ended up with the largest share. But despite that, the president chose a centrist prime minister to lead the parliament, and well, that backfired, especially at the end of 2024 when we saw the results of that establishment pick, which was more chaos. And following them, the Germans dissolved their government, and then the South Koreans have impeached their president and also that guy's replacement. And even when the voters had their say in England and finally turfed out the Tories, there wasn't any honeymoon period for the Labour government either, because it's just bad vibes all around. Because regardless of what these governments sort of do at this point in history, they're just suffering the consequences of all of the things that have been done in the past and that they need to fix or change or whatever. And I think it would be remiss of me not to mention the killing of the health insurance CEO in the year of Enshittification, and the consequences that these systems have both for those affected and sometimes for their leaders. Things weren't that much better for the more authoritarian states this year either. Back in January, Hong Kong liquidated China's biggest property developer, Evergrande, sparking lots of chatter of the collapse of the Chinese economy. And though it's a bit overblown, this is a sign of China's decline, or at least, plateauing. It's another example of Enshittification in a way, because it's a big corporation putting profits and growth ahead of the people for years and years, and now we're seeing the consequences, and it's affecting things globally, not just in China and to the Chinese people. In more turmoil, we turn toward the Middle East, where Israel expanded the war, both with tit-for-tat with Iran and an invasion of the neighboring country of Lebanon. So the situation there has deteriorated rather significantly. And despite all of these military victories from Israel, there doesn't seem to be much else for them to do, but at the same time, there doesn't seem to be any end in sight either for the civilians affected. Nearby, the situation in Syria also spectacularly combusted, with the regime of Bashar al-Assad falling within what felt like 2 to 3 days to the rebel groups, and then being backed by Russia meant that all those guys had to flee. And that gives us a nice segue to the war in Ukraine, which continued that sense of the inevitable, grind and the inevitable things going badly. Because we had lots of the slow gaining of ground from the Russians, but on the other side of the equation, despite the constant boy cries nuclear war various times throughout the year, we got the continued degradation of the restrictions to Ukraine's offensives, culminating in Western-supplied long-range missiles being used on Russian soil. And the big Kursk offensive in August, where the Ukrainians managed to straight up just take a bunch of Russian land and are still holding on to it, despite the added cannon fodder of North Korean troops being added into the mix. It is a situation that doesn't seem like it'll add to much, because it's not that much territory, but it shows the weakness of the Russians defensively, and the move from both sides seems very much geared for some kind of deal-making that'll actually end the conflict. The year itself, of course, being the year of Enshittification, cannot hold such a deal. So we'll push our hopes of resolution and justice to 2025 for both regions. Just with that, I feel like the year was quite full with the elections and all the conflicts. But continuing on with the theme, this was also the year of all of those Boeing failures, which we set up at the start. One happened in January. It's sad because this was a company with a tremendously good reputation for creating quality products. And it's now succumbing to the profit motive and having a series of very high profile failures, and not just with planes, but with Starliner as well. Oh, and remember at the start of this video when I mentioned that that there was that plane crash landing in South Korea that killed 179 people? Yeah, that was a Boeing plane. I also don't think SpaceX should get off the hook here either. What with not a single orbital launch being successful. When NASA did it, they did it like the first try, okay? We were supposed to be on Mars by now, according to Elon Musk, apparently, but okay, fine, let's just clap the fact that you caught a rocket. Which I find odd, because they had these landing systems and we had them caught before anyway, but look, whatever. Anyway, in preparing for this thing, if we're sort of speaking of technology and stuff like that, I'd actually completely forgotten that this year was the year of the largest global IT outage in history. CrowdStrike issued a patch or something for Windows computers and it just wrecked people's PCs. And you might not think this is that related to the theme, but one of the main issues with Enshittification is that we can't do anything to stop what is occurring. Google, Microsoft, Apple, Facebook, Amazon, these are companies that are just too large and have integrated themselves in with everyone and everything. And so a mistake like this can just wreck the economy globally for a day or two. And this wouldn't have happened before. Okay, like if I slack off in the middle of a shift, someone else can make up for it. Okay, this kind of failure, or if I call in sick, it's probably a better example. There's redundancy there that doesn't exist for when these systems are so integrated with everything. Now, this year continued the trend of high-profile video game companies just not getting it, with several high-profile failures. So, joining Bethesda and Blizzard from last year, we have Ubisoft, with like 3 pretty big flops, I think, and Warner Brothers with another 3, Square Enix also chipping in there as well. And most of these seemed like they were attempting to crack an already saturated live service market without much of a compelling pitch other than just chasing the trend. But the problem is this trend existed and was capitalized on by people already. And so that slow encroaching shittification of these things coming out now, of course they're going to be failures. They've missed the wave because they're following the trend. Most of the successes seem to mostly come from the indie space, like with Balatro. But even with some of them, like Palworld and Helldivers 2, the former is being sued by Nintendo for patent infringement of, like, I think the capturing mechanic, and the latter was embroiled in the Sony account controversy. So good on the big corpos for spoiling most people's fun for not much justification at all, except for making a quick buck or making a number go up. There was also an Olympics this year, and that is quite fitting in that behind all of the spectacle and short-term boost to the economy, almost all Olympics end up being bad for their host nations. We won't necessarily know if this will be good for France until later on down the line, but for now, it fits the narrative of enshittification. And although there may be many more examples of this happening in other sports and in other events, there may not be a better spectacle of enshittification this year than Jake Paul, a YouTuber wanting clout from winning boxing matches for some reason, fighting an old man who probably needs some money. Apart from all that, I really only follow the cricket sports-wise all that closely, and to me it was interesting that at the start of the year we had Australia lose a test match to a young West Indian bowler. Now on paper, Australia should have just completely clean swept the series, but that last game at the Gabba was an absolute nail-biter that they just fell short on. And this new versus establishment thing did play out throughout the year. But it was also an example of an aging side falling apart a little bit. And it's a microcosm to global demographic challenges. This is happening to cricket's two strongest teams, India and Australia. And coming into the much hyped series between the two teams right at the end of the year in this summer, the big narrative was whether these teams with aging players, legends usually in their own right, that had performed in the past could bounce back after massively underperforming leading up to the series. India recently getting destroyed by New Zealand on home territory 3-zip, which that's insane. And so there are big questions as to whether or not too much preferential treatment is given to these older players for their legendary status at the expense of talented youngsters with less development in their prefrontal cortex, which is a thing that you can look up if you want. For India, in that series, they paid the price. But since both teams are aging in this current series that they're playing, we're more looking at results on a per-player basis. And for the most part, yeah, the legends and oldies are definitely at best unders. Most of them would probably be dropped if they didn't have just the legendary status. Although I will say, just yesterday, as I record this, we had a sensational conclusion to the Boxing Day Test match, and it seems like the older Australian squad are holding firm. Oh, and on a personal note, if you're watching this because you follow the channel and watch the videos, thank you very much. My output for this channel has been woeful this year, and I'm a little bit surprised I actually ended up getting this thing done, to be honest, but I guess there's a time pressure there that forces me to make the videos. I was supposed to have Helldivers 2 video out, but it just did not click in the way that I would want, and when I'm still working on it, it'll probably be released very soon though, because I need to get it out of the way so that I can work on other stuff. I can't work on multiple projects at the same time. My brain goes crazy. But despite that, part of the reason why I've been so unproductive in terms of making videos is because I have actually been playing a bunch of games, which was not a thing the year previously. I think I played like 2 games last year. So I make recordings of basically everything, just in case I need the footage or whatever. And these are the games that I played this year. And I'd already sort of like built a theming in my head like a few months into the year, because I started the year by playing Cursed to Golf. And that game is all about just having a good time. Golf became a job, and now you've been sent to hell to discover the fun of golf in order to get resurrected. That's Cursed to Golf. And so yeah, it was just, hey, have fun, have a good time. And then I immediately followed that up with Hard Space Shipbreaker, which is basically just a game where you do a job, and then because of the terrible working conditions, form a union. And then the rest of the games I played, in some way or another, are fairly closely aligned with just doing a job, right? It's not like playing a big sweeping RPG where you're going on an adventure and you can do whatever you want. No, it's like, no, you have a very specific job, like designing a metro system, or building a factory, or keeping this, like mining things for a structure. And incidentally, with Core Keeper, by the way, I used to just have that, oh yeah, let's have fun and mine things and get the materials, and then to do the harder difficulties. And as I was talking to my friend, it was like, no, strip mining is the answer. The doing the job is the answer. And so there's just me strip mining from that point onwards. I never intended for, or I guess I never initially read into that string of just have a fun game and then, okay, get back to work as a theme of being tied to Enshittification. But it kind of is in a way, because in our societies, with how it is, we have to just go and do work. And now I'm finding myself just doing that in my free time, playing games. But towards the end of the year, that kind of opened up with the addition of Space Marine 2 and Against the Storm. Though they are still a little bit linked to doing a job sort of a thing like Helldivers, because you're there to either serve the Emperor in Space Marine 2, or you're there to serve the Queen and just do this job of managing your little town and building it up. So, yeah, that was the year for me. 2025, I expect to be much more productive, at least in comparison, okay? My goals usually are to make more videos than I have previously. I should be able to do that next time. I just have to beat 2. That's it. I just have to beat 2. One of them is already in the bag because I just look at the things, and with my thing, with my notes system, it's a little bit easier than it was before. And with outsourcing, it's even easier than it was last year. So, yeah, that one's in the bag. So I just need to make 2. I just need to make 2 videos, and we've beaten it. But I don't know. We'll see. There's life, as it has done this year, finds a way to get in the way of productivity. And maybe it's a sad sign for me that I'm so fixated on being productive rather than just enjoying the things that happen when they come up. But whatever. All right, let's finish this video off. Looking back at the year, there's been a ton that has been happening. Obviously, more than I and this video can handle. I didn't even mention Taylor Swift's global Eras tour, but because it didn't support the theme, we're going to ignore it. This is, after all, an exercise in confirmation bias, and the main point is to remind us of the fact that years are long, which we tend to lose sight of as they close. But also, as humans, we love finding patterns and things that match, or we try to find or create a vibe. The word of the year stuff is an attempt by nerds to do that, and I think Enshittification and its more loose definition now fits the bill quite well, given all of the grinding conflicts and democratic turmoil and degradation to so many aspects of life. I think most people feel less in control of their lives and are becoming more aware of all of the little ways we are getting gouged or our time is being wasted. And to sum up, demographic collapse, inflation, climate change, price gouging, and the rest of it. These are all the results of things that have been set years ago that we're all paying the price for now. And that was 2024.